modern animation has come a long way. We didn't have drawings like this on the screen. We didn't have shading like this. Only the anime characters did. Well, now we've got this, and it's incredible. The storytelling, the drawing, the special effects that are generated for a lot of these cartoons are very cinematic, and it really brings the characters in a whole different light and really brings them to life. So it's really very enjoyable to re-watch these old characters be brought back as a new thing. And a lot of people now relate to these because of these new movies. Over time, different artists have taken this character and have rendered it in however they depicted it. A lapel on the right, no lapel, a gold rope, a yellow or gold on the trim. So many different variations of this character. Stylized, non-stylized. I can only pick one. So I chose this one, the more recent one that I could actually relate to. And be prepared, this video is over an hour long. There's a lot of details. Let's get started. To begin with, I have added chapters to this video for you to go back and review. And yes, you will need those chapters because there's so much detail in this video. It's over an hour long. To begin with, the base body is a Batman, and you've seen this same body on Space Ghost, and of course on the other custom Batman figures that I've worked on in the past. And I chose this one simply because of the gray color. I wish I would have found another in the gray plastic, unpainted plastic, but it's neither here nor there. We've got this, and yes, it's got wonderful texture, and it's an older body, an older physique, in other words, that lends itself to the actual characteristic of the character we're going to then create using this particular figure. You will have to disassemble it. You got to take apart that belt, you've got to take those fins off of the gauntlets, and you've got to shave down the boots. And if you want to, this is the time to remove the pins out of the joints, knees and elbows, and grind those down. I did not do this on this, I got ahead of myself, but I'll show you in the later clip that I ended up going back in and grinding those down to make room for paint. I ended up plugging up those pins because I did not want them visible on the red suit. If you want to add extra articulation to it, you can. Will it help? Honestly, no. Because if you're going to paint it, the joints here are so tight that it doesn't matter what you do to give it more articulation. All you're going to do is end up causing paint rub. So in essence, it becomes a somewhat movable statue. It's not going to be to your benefit to add the extra joints or mobility. Now this is the Tamiya primer that I used because I want my red to be a bright red. If I just paint over the gray, it's just going to look dark red. We wanted bright red. So the thing to do was actually cover it with 2 layers of the Tamiya white primer, thoroughly let it dry, and then we come back with the actual paint. And the paint that I used in my airbrush was the Vallejo Premium Black. A few drops of this paint was all that was needed to create the shading that is now needed to create those different tones of red. So spraying at an angle from the bottom up and capturing only the texture and only with a slight tone just to show shading, not to cover the entire piece in black. We only want to catch those textures, the relief of the actual mold that is there on the texture on the cloth that would either be the costume, and then we're going to allow that to dry. So we're going to do that to every single limb, the torso, the arms, the legs, and then we come back with the paint. So I switched brands here because I still have some of this golden, the red, and it's a bright red, and using again the airbrush, giving it 2 to 3 coats of paint to make sure all of the crevices are completely covered in red paint. Yes, once it's dry, I do want to bend at the knee and also paint the knee as well, because we don't want to forget those articulation points. As you can tell, the paint is a high gloss, and once it dries, it's gonna look high gloss. If that is what you want, then leave it. However, I don't like the glossy paint on a hero suit. I like it to be a matte finish. So I'm gonna wait till it's fully dry. I'm gonna come back in with the Liquitex matte varnish. And yes, I am going to use the airbrush once again to cover it entirely and give it a nice even coat so that it looks uniform. So again, using the airbrush, a few drops in the airbrush, and then spraying it onto the surface from all angles and waiting for this to dry, and then it's gonna look totally different. That matte finish makes it look that much more pristine. Now, somebody did ask me, do you grind down the joints to paint them? The answer is yes. And somebody asked, do you have to do it? The answer is yes. If you want your action figure to look store-bought or just very clean in general, this is one step you cannot overlook, unless there's plenty of room in there for that paint not to rub. But in general, most figures will have paint rub, and you will have to do this to avoid that flaw and keep a nice looking action figure. So I thought very, very long on how I'm going to do this. And I remembered, I removed that emblem from from Black Adam. I can reuse it. And that's what I did. So I used epoxy sculpt to fill in the chest on the cavity left by the bat emblem and shaped it to be able to fit this emblem in it. And once it was dry, then I could cut out the actual hard edge angles and leave room at the bottom, as you can tell here, to be able to glue it down. If you want to put a light in this, you still can. It's that much more difficult because the joints are so tight. Now, I glued it down with Fabri-Tac glue. Why didn't I use super glue? Because super glue dries instantly, and once it's dry, it's there. With the Fabri-Tac, you have more dry time. And because you have more dry time, you can reposition it where you need it. Once you have it in the place you want, you can then clamp it down and allow it to dry for at least 4 hours. It does dry within the hour for you to manipulate it, but if you let those 4 hours pass, it's going to have an incredibly strong bond. Now, it's not going to be permanent because you can reheat it and take it apart, but as long as that glue is holding at a cool temperature, those pieces will stay. I decided to add the emblem at this point in the project because I did not want to mar the surface of a painted piece to glue on the emblem. Now, once it's fully dry, you can actually go back over it and cover it with liquid mask. If you want to use a tape to create a mask, that's fine. But the liquid mask is so much easier to work with because it goes into all of the crevices, it goes into all of the different angles, and it's easy to move around. But you do have to let it dry. If you manipulate it while it's drying, it becomes sticky, and you're going to end up peeling parts off of it that you did not want to remove. So allow it to fully dry and then come back and clean up the areas that you want to paint. Now, I probably should have left the boots in black, but I did paint them in the white primer. Now, I went back in, painted back over them in black, because it's going to work that much better for the gold rub and buff. And these Buccaneer boots are supposed to be gold, so the bottom here is actual paint. The actual top of the boots, that's going to be in a gold spandex. But let me show you how well this gold rub and buff goes on and how nice it looks. It looks really, really good. Now, originally I had painted it white because I was thinking of painting it yellow, and white works best for having a bright yellow. It doesn't work great if you've got black underneath, but it works great for the gold. So this is what it's going to look like. Now let's focus our attention on the top of the boots. In those two sleeves that you see at the top of the screen, those are sleeves for these Buccaneer boots that I've been working on. And you're looking at only one of the attempts that I actually did. I attempted this 6 different times. I did record it, but I chose the better of those clips. And you want to start off with the gold spandex and invert it upside down. You want to use the graph that's on your mat to be able to do this correctly. I made an inch of circumference at the top, or a length of 1 inch at the top using that 1 inch graph, and then cutting it, matching up the corners, cutting the top, matching up the corners, and thereby giving me this funny looking shape. Still not finished. We're going to meet those two corners, cut off the excess of that folded tab on both sides, so that when it folds over and we glue it down, it just has a very, very small minimal margin that is going to be glued. That way we don't have excess fabric on the boot. And remember, this is the boot top. However, we have to make it long enough so that that sleeve is able to hold onto it and create the bottom part of the boot. Now with the same fabric tack glue, a very small bead of glue, using a popsicle stick or whatever other material you may have to sandwich between the two layers. You don't want glue spewing into the bottom or oozing out and then ruining your fabric, because the gold spandex is going to be very susceptible to any kind of glue. It will actually discolor it. So you want to make sure you don't have glue coming out of the seam and ruining your fabric. Now once this is dry, and it doesn't take very long for this fabric tack to dry on the fabric, it takes just a few minutes. But if you leave it for 20 or 30 minutes, you'll have a stronger hold. Now you want to even out the edges, and now you're going to fold it over on the edge to create a lip. And that lip, or that seam at the top, is then what we are going to use to fold over once we turn it inside out, so that we can have that flared look on the boot. And then we're going to put it onto the leg. So you want to have at least a 1/4 inch of the fabric, the gold side, coming over onto the yellow to create that seam. And you can glue this down using the same fabric tack glue. You want to use an applicator, maybe a flathead screwdriver, popsicle stick, whatever it is that you have on hand that's going to be easy for you to manipulate with that glue. Take your time and do this. You don't want the glue on your hands, because again, it will ruin the coloring of the fabric that is on this spandex. Now once you've created your buccaneer boots, the tops of them, keep them inverted inside out, and then you can either glue them onto the actual leg, or in my case, I just tied some wire at the top where the boot is. And then I just flipped it down to create the top of the buccaneer boot. That's it. No signs to it. Again, I did this 6 times because I kept making them too small. They look like tube socks. And that's not the look I wanted. I wanted these flared out tops on these boots. Now that they are in place, we can slide this sleeve over the top of this yellow to create the bottom of the boot. Because this is going to be loose, you don't have to glue it down, because if you did glue it down, it'd be almost impossible to slide it up onto the fabric. Once it's there, you can actually lift up the edge and glue that down. Remember that it's got to be long enough to cover that ball joint. And so long as it covers the ball joint, it'll look like it's a one-piece unit. Now, as you can tell, folding over the top of the buccaneer boot covers the seam. It looks like you only have one piece on this boot. There's really 2 pieces. And you'll repeat the same for the other side. Now once you finish the work on your buccaneer boots, you will have a matching pair. And your shoes will match the tops of the boots because of the rub and buff. And it looks really, really nice. Now the gauntlets on the arms do not match. I had to have them match. So I'm not even going to show you how I made these because I don't like them. They turned out wrong. That sash or that belt, it looks okay. But okay is not good enough. I had to change it to make it look more like the drawing that we saw earlier. And although this looks okay, I had to have it to what I was envisioning. So this is what you should have once you put together the bottom of the torso together. After it's all sprayed down with the Liquitex matte varnish, you've got the boots on there and they're all set in place. And this belt, it still doesn't look good. That knot is way too big. That flare on those loose pieces, it's way too big. I had to find a way to make it smaller, but still look dramatic. But let me show you how I ended up doing that without having to start from scratch all over again. So I'll give you a brief demo of how to make that belt. It's really very simple. You take your fabric and your glue, and you glue down one edge to create a seam. Then you will glue down the opposite edge and glue in the wire. Keep the ends of the wire exposed so that you can attach the loose fabric at the very end. Now we've got one edge here, and now we're going to take our glue and run it down the center and add the wire to the other edge. As mentioned earlier, keep the ends of the wire exposed. Why? Because you'll want to match them up and cut away the excess fabric. Remember that we had a very large knot at the other video with our belt, and it just looked really bad. Now, because this fabric and the glue dry quickly, it will hold the seam for you, and so it's going to be easier to work with. Now that you've got it set in place, even out your wire. Now you're going to turn it into the corners into each other, find out where your wires meet, and now you're going to cut away the excess fabric. Naturally, this is a much narrower belt. The other belt I had on the figure, or have on the figure, is much wider. Cutting away the excess fabric now allows the two wires to be closer, and now you can intertwine them, and that will hold them in place. You won't have to glue them together. Just the wire itself, woven into itself, is going to hold it in place. Now, once you've got this, you can now create the two ends that are going to attach to those wires. And that's nothing more than an excess or an extra piece of fabric. Roll it into a cone. You can glue it or iron it together, and then glue the iron pleats or iron-on pleats that you have in there. And now you're going to attach glue to the exposed wire. Take the cone, the open end of the fabric, and slide it over the wire. Because it is the same matching fabric, once the glue is dry, it's going to look like it's a one-piece unit. And depending how long you leave that wire is the mobility that you will have on the extreme posing that you can do with that fabric. Do the same for the opposite side. Now let's go ahead and add the collar and the edge of that lapel with that button. These are made out of epoxy sculpt, part AB. Once they're mixed and you allow them to dry, they harden and they make a really nice addition to your sculpt. If you want to keep the lines smooth, you can use a little bit of water and smooth them out as it is drying. Once it's fully dry, it'll stay smooth. But if you want it smoother, then you can use a fine grit sandpaper. Once you've got that done, you can just go back over it with a fine line brush and only paint those areas. You don't have to respray the whole figure with your airbrush or paint it with an actual hand brush, just the areas that need the paint. Now let's work on those armbands or those gauntlets. As you can tell, I didn't like these at all. And I spent a lot of time on these. Again, I spent several attempts trying to get this right. I made them too tight, I made them too small, I made them too big, and then I added these designs, and in the end, it stretching out the covered or the gold that covers that material, it just loses the it loses the luminosity of it, the splendor of it, and you can tell it's lost its luster. So I'm gonna get rid of these and just glue these on just like the boots. That way they match. So there's gonna be no texturing. I will fold over the edges to have a seam top and bottom, but I will cut them in a triangular form so that they can fit around the top and the narrower bottom edge by the actual cuff. And that way it stays and it's gonna look that much more, it's gonna look nicer. The luster, the gold luster is gonna look really good. It'll match the boots and the belt. Now once you've got your gauntlets, belt, and boots completed, they should all match and look just like this. You can reassemble your figure to look just like this. You still have an unfinished portrait, and now what we've got to do is work on the cape. But now at least you have come this far in making your action figure look like the artwork that was originally that we had seen. But let's get this off of the distractions that are in the background and by itself in a solid background. This is what we now have as a semi-completed product. And now, as I mentioned, now we've got to do some cleanup work. We got to create the cape, finish the portrait, clean up that emblem, and we still have to add a few details around the collar and of course that rope that's going to hold that cape. And of course, there's a lot of little details on the cape, and I know that's why a lot of you are here. You want to see how that cape was made. Let me show you. So let's talk about the cape, which is the main characteristic and of course the attraction of any of the capes, any character that has a cape. In this case, we're using white cotton fabric and we're using gold metallic bias tape. I don't know why they came up with the term bias. However, this is a metallic cloth or material that is already prefabricated for you. It is already pleated. It is folded 4 times over, actually 3 times. So it's got 3 folds in it, and it is for an edge on any fabric. However, this is a 1/2 inch and it's still too large for the cape that I need for this particular character. So as you can see, it would slide over the edge of the fabric and you would have to sew it on. Now sewing this on is really tricky, especially if it's this small. We need it to be this small, a 1/4 inch. So I will have to cut it and fold it over and re-iron it. And that was, it wasn't fun, but it was still what was needed to get this project completed. But let me start with you on the pattern cut for the cape, because that's going to be important to attach this bias tape. So we start with a square that is 5.5 inches high by 6 wide, and it's folded at the top, so we have now 2 layers of white cotton fabric. We want to keep the fold at the top because that's going to help us out with making a small seam for a wire to go at the top and stretch along the right and left hand side. No wire at the bottom. Again, personally, I just don't like it. You just can't have a relaxed look once you have a wire at the bottom. It's just going to be too much complication into creating a museum pose if you've got a wire at the bottom. But the wires at the edge and the top, those are going to be essential for posing the figure or the cape itself. And of course I should have switched out my blade to make it a little sharper, but in any case, you get the idea. I cut from one corner to the top, leaving roughly 2.5 inches in width at the top. So measuring at the center, 1.25 inches over, and 1.25 inches over to the left and right side, 1.25 inches, and then cutting that at the corner to the top. So now we have it's an angled triangle without the top, you could say, or it's just the perspective of it here is off. But it is a triangle, we just don't have a top pyramid on that triangle. Again, this is 2 layers of cotton now, and we have a fold at the top where we're going to now sew a small stitch to create a channel or seam to pass that wire through. And then we'll stitch the right and left hand side also, roughly about 1/4 inch in, and that's just barely going to be enough to cover by the bias tape. Now if you got your sewing machine ready, white thread on the top, and yes, I did use matching white thread on the string that is on the bottom, or the thread that is in the actual bobbin in the bottom of the machine itself. So place the needle as closest to the edge without being at the edge, and that's roughly going to be about 1/4 inch. If you want to go a 1/16, that's fine. Don't start sewing at the edge. Come in about 1/2 inch on either side and only sew in the center, so you have this. So the ends are going to be open. Why? Because we're going to sew another channel continuing from there. We want the wire to be hidden inside the cloth, and the stitching will prevent it from falling into the center of the cape. The bias tape will then cover the stitching that we did. So again, don't start at the edge, start toward the center, because it's going to be one continuous wire. We're not putting in 3 pieces, one single piece. We're just going to bend it to be able to make those corners. So go slow, you don't have to go very quick. This is what you want to end up with on the edge. And of course, you don't have to do this at the bottom. Only the left and right side of the cape will need the stitching to hold in the wire. I'll show you how to place it in just a moment. So now we have to insert the wire. These are the 2 tools you'll need to cut it and to bend it. This is 24 gauge wire. And there is our slot on the left, right side, and the top. Now remember that the sides are open, and it's only stitched so that we can hold the wire inside, well, at the edge, keep it away from the inside of the center of the cape. So just measure out approximately how much wire you're going to need. If you want it to go all the way to the bottom edge, that's fine. It doesn't have to, but that's going to be your personal preference. Do you have to round out the bottom edge of the wire? You can. Since you've got plenty of room to work with here, it's not going to snag anywhere. If it does snag, it's at the top, but it's going to be very unlikely. Now, once you've measured out an even side to both sides, then you can take your flat nose pliers and give it a 90-degree angle on both sides. And of course, straighten out your wire as best as possible. It's going to be a bit tedious because the wire's on a spool and it's going to be difficult to keep it flat. So I'm going to do this off camera. I'll do a little bit on camera. I'll just speed up the process so you can actually see it. It's going to take a while for you to do it. It took me that much longer when it was on camera, so I did most of it off camera. Let me show you the process itself. You're going to glue it 1 inch at a time, and then you're going to clamp it so it doesn't unravel as you work the process all the way through to the end. Let me show you what this looks like. Alright, now that took a while, but now it should be dry, and then we're going to remove these clips and the cape should stay in place. I'm sorry, the wire should stay in place at the edges of the cape. Sorry about the terminology there. Now, you want to remove these obviously before they end up drying onto the cape if that glue ended up soaking through the fabric. Now, this is now where you should have your cape wired and ready to go. If you've got any creases in here, this is the time to iron them out, make it nice and clean. Now going back to the bias tape, remember, I've already cut it in half. You see the half of it now. Now I'm going to show you how to fold it and crease it again to make it appropriate size for this cape. As you can see, this is way too wide for this particular size cape. If this was maybe a 1/6 action figure, a 12-inch, then this may work. But even then, I think this is still too big of an edge for a cape like this. Now, let me take you to the second part of this cape, because this has a lot of steps to complete. It's not just this. We have to attach the bias tape with something. I don't want glue because glue is harder to work with and is going to seep through the fabric. But if we use this iron-on tape, or it's an iron-on glue, then we're going to be able to have a cleaner look. But it's still too wide. But this one we can cut into 3 pieces of about 1/16 of an inch to be able to place at the very edge of the cotton fabric on both sides. So you'll have to cut enough of these strips to be able to work continuously. Or otherwise you'll just have to stop and cut each one as you work with it. And that's fine as well. Depends how you want to work your fabric. Now once you've caught it or cut it down, and it's easiest with a pair of scissors, don't use a razor. It's just not going to stay in place. It's going to slide all over the place. Now you take the glue side facing down and iron one edge in to hold it, tack it down, and then iron the rest. Now let's get back to our bias tape, and I've already folded in one edge toward the center. Using the iron, it's very, very easy to do. The only complication is you've got 2 feet of this to work on. And it's not one edge, it's both sides that you have to do. So once you finish this and just work an inch at a time, take your time to do this, because if you crease it improperly, it's going to be really hard to work with once you try to attach it to the edge of the cape. Now once you got both sides, just fold them over together and iron them out together so you have a 1/4 inch bias tape custom made for your cape or whatever it is you want to work on. Now let's get back to the cotton fabric of the cape, and we're going to tape our iron-on tape on here and then tack it on one corner, slide the iron to the other end, and iron it completely so it's right at the edge. And you want to leave a tab on the right side or left side, whichever you start, so that you can pull the tape off. Now, keep in mind that we have to do this on both sides. And now that we have this on here, we can peel the backing and we'll have our glue at the bottom. Now, the trick is that you want to hide the seam. Remember, we cut 2 feet of bias tape and folded it over. Now we're going to cut a nice clean edge on this so that we can place it in the center at the bottom. It's easiest to hide it at the bottom. And we're going to iron it onto the exposed glue that is on the edge of the cape. And just take your time. If you want to use clips to hold it down, that's fine. I just tack in one corner and go over the rest. Now, remember, the wax paper is still on the other side, on the left side, and the right-hand side is not glued down, but it's only this half side that we're looking at. Now we've got to turn it over and do the other. And in this case, we also have corners, but I'll show you that in just a minute. So for now, we're going to glue the opposite side so it doesn't move on us. Same size tape. I've already cut this ahead of time. I'm going to iron in one corner and then iron out the rest. And then I'm going to cut part of the wax paper off. So only the piece in the gold is going to get glued down. The other is still going to be covered with that wax paper. So just this corner, peel it away, and then cut it right there at the edge. And now we can iron this other piece without worrying about the glue on the right hand side. Now once this is down, we can make our corner, and making our corner is going to be important because we don't want to cut the tape. If you cut it, it's going to be very difficult to hide that seam because this metallic fabric will fray very easily. So to make the corner, all you're going to do, well, first of all, let's attach our piece here at the corner and at the edge, and then I'll show you the corner in just a moment. All right, let's go right into the corner. You're going to fold it over. You're going to have this funky looking corner here, but now you can pinch it, push the fabric in, and then press it down. And if you want, you can then take your iron and only glue that corner down because you already have that glue underneath it, and it will stay down. Because it is a rigid fabric, I should say, and it's metallic, it will press just fine. And it presses so much nicer than the cotton, actually, and so it will stay where you leave that pleat or that mark if you iron it out. Now, once you have that down, you can iron out the rest of the edge and repeat the same process for each of the corners. Now, to have matching corners, you'll have to keep in mind that you want to just bend the tape the opposite direction at the other corner so that it matches the opposite corner. Once you've got that in, don't forget to place in your other glue tape or iron-on tape on the opposite side to hold that bias tape down. Tack down one corner, slide the iron along the edge all the way to the opposite edge, peel away the wax paper, and then fold over your bias tape and iron it on. Then go to your corner and repeat that pleat in the opposite direction that you had on the other. That way you have matching corners. Okay, so you got through all your corners. Now you've made it back to the center of the cape at the bottom. And the question is, how are you going to join it? Well, we're going to join it using the same method, using that same tape, but this time to join the two ends that meet up, we're just going to use fabric tack glue because this actual tape is actually porous and that glue will seep right into those fibers and hold it together. Don't use super glue. Super glue is just going to look tacky. It hardens and it's going to look really stiff. And it's not going to be easy to work with because once it's down, it's down. So if the fabric tack glue is slow drying, it does dry quicker on fabric, but it will still be slow enough that you can manipulate it to make those ends match. So what I did here is I ended up tacking down the center where they meet. Remember, this is folded over, so only the folded edge will actually glue down. The center, or the exterior part that is not glued in, that's where you have to use the fabric tack glue to glue it down to itself so that it does not look like it's so it doesn't look as obvious, so it blends into the seam itself. So tacking down one corner and then moving along the edge till the corner at the other end to meet up, pinching it in at the corner and folding it in the correct direction so that it matches the opposite side. Once you've got this down, just repeat the same on the back side of the cape. And just in case you're wondering, this is actually my fourth cape, and I was just doing this for the video purpose of showing you how to do it. But I think it's going to turn out a lot better than the third one. I'm going to keep this one. Now, if you've got any loose corners like this, obviously the iron-on tape isn't inside those folded corners. So using the fabric tack glue, just with an applicator, you can just apply the needed glue at the corners and then hold it down with some of those clothespins and wait for it to dry. Again, it's cloth, so it's going to dry that much quicker. And within a few moments, you'll have a nice pleated corner for your cape. Now, the rope is something that you've got to see that's done. It's braided. So I took 3 strands of that embroidery thread, and I just braided it. I only need 2 inches of this, but it's just time-consuming and tedious. If you don't know how to braid, well, this video will show you how. And it's just 3 strands, 1 center one, 2 on the left and right side, and just bring your right side over the center, pull it over to the right, leave that in the center, and just repeat it with the left and right side. And give it a little tug to keep that weave tight. And once you reached the approximate length that you want, just tie another knot, and then that'll keep it from unraveling. And depending on how long you want it, is how much braiding you're going to have to do. I only needed the 2 inches because I need to make a small circular rope to hold the actual cape in place. And you can cut the ends off, and those knots will hold it in place. Now I'm going to glue those 2 ends together using the same fabric tack glue. Again, this is fabric, so it's going to hold tight. It's going to glue down very quickly. I'll just place it in this clip for a while until it dries, and then we'll be set. Now let's get back to the details on the cape itself. Now I did put pleats in this earlier because I wanted to get a margin of where I want to place those flowers or tassels, and I marked it out with a pencil. I marked out 4 of them, 4 little dots, and then I used the same embroidery thread that I used for the rope for these tassels. Now the reason I use pencil is because obviously you can erase it, and it's not going to be as dominant if I had used a pen or some other marker. Now this thread is actually rather thick, and I tried using it as is, but it was just too difficult to work with. So I ended up splitting it into two because there's actually two that are woven together. And it made it so much easier. And I went through a lot of trial and error trying to make these flowers. I stitched them on, I threaded it through. Anyway, my end result was to actually create those flowers or ribbons in hand, tie a knot in the center, and leave a long strand so that I can put it through the eye of the needle and then thread it through. And if you remember, the cape itself has two layers. So we've got a top layer and we've got an underlying layer. And now, because of that, we can hide the knot that is going to hold those tassels in place. So this is the fourth cape that you just saw me working on. So I'm going to take this one thread and I will make a double bow. And then I'm going to tie a knot in the center of that bow, leave a long thread extended so that I can then thread it into the needle and then attach it to the top layer of the cape. We don't want to stitch through the bottom layer because we don't want to see a knot. We want it hidden in between the two layers. So here's our bow. We've got four, well, it's a double bow, so it's going to be like a tassel of 4 petals. If you want to tie a knot right here at the top, you could, but it doesn't hold very well with this thread. It ends up slipping and it doesn't hold it. So you'll have to tie the knot in the center of the two bows to make this work. And then you can actually thread it through with a needle. Now this is the finished look that you'll have on your cape once you painstakingly and very patiently redo those flowers or tassels until you like them. And once it's there, you'll have this look. Now we still have to finish the portrait, and that'll be coming up next. But now we have a project that is really much more advanced. The cape itself has to be short. It is not a long cape like the modern Shazam. It's a short cape, and it's a double cape. And at the top, that's actually the same part of the cape as you noticed earlier. You just fold it over. And what's holding it? It's that rope. It's that wire that is now bent that causes a curve or a hook to hold onto that rope that is around his neck. So if you wanted to switch out the cape for a longer one or a different colored trim, this allows you to do that. Otherwise, it would be glued to the body. It's not glued to that rope. It is only holding on with tension against that rope. But I don't like the way that rope looks around his neck. It looks like it's choking him. So I'll show you in a moment what I did to actually install it. In the meantime, let's finish the portrait. Now I have already painted the skin tone and I've already painted the hair, but we've got to paint the eyes. And eyes are the most complicated thing and most tedious, and well, they're just not fun to do. You don't want white, you want a light gray as the base white of the eyes. And I did get ahead of myself on this. I actually went ahead a little bit later, and I'll show you in a moment, that I added a dark gray to the inside to create the edge of the eye. I didn't use black because black is overly dominant and it's just very ominous. It's too dark. So I used a dark gray to create the shading of the lashes of the eye at the top, as you can see here now. Then I went back in and used my light gray for the base of the eyes. Now the brush that I'm using here is like a quadruple zero. It is mega tiny. It's meant for miniatures. And as you can tell, the portrait, well, it's a miniature if you're looking at the eyes. The only reason they look this big is because I'm really zoomed in. But I'm also using magnifiers. That's the only reason why I can see them. Without those magnifiers or zooming in this close with the camera, I can't see what I'm doing. Those pupils are super tiny on this particular portrait. So it was difficult, and it's going to be difficult for anybody if you're not using the actual magnifying goggles. It's going to make it so much easier even if you do have that good eyesight. Once you've got this down pat, then your portraits are going to look so much better, so much cleaner. And if you want to change the direction of the eyes, this is the time to do it. For most of us, we like the eyes facing forward. And we do want that highlight in the eye because it shows that spark or life in the actual character. If you just paint the black dot or the blue dot, whatever it is, and there's no highlight, no spark, it's going to have a dead look in the portrait. It's not going to look like it's actually looking at you. So you've got to have the highlight in the eye to make it look realistic. So you've made it to cape installation. Now we want to use a 1/32 drill bit in your vise drill, and you want to drill this by hand because you don't want to melt the plastic, which is what will happen if you use a Dremel. At high speed, it will not just drill through it, but it can melt that plastic, and you don't want to distort it. You want to keep it as clean as possible. I ended up drilling right in the center in the front of the chest. Should I have drilled two holes, one at the far end. Yeah, maybe, but for now this will work. And if you want to drill 2 holes at each end of the collar, then that's up to you. But I ended up using a very tiny hook that I made out of the wire that I inserted into the actual cape. Here it is right here. And we're just going to glue it right in there. And then we're going to take our rope, hook it onto that, and let it dry in place. Now remember, this is the rope that I made. And I made this by braiding 3 pieces of that same material or string into one single piece. So this is how it's going to be held. And to me, it looks that much more, well, more believable. So you want to glue the wire by adding glue to the wire itself, not to the drilled surface. Why? Because that glue can actually eat away at the paint that you just attached there. Now, by gluing the wire in this way, it will carry the glue down into the perforation and secure it. So before we go on, let's take a look at a few head swaps on this figure before we finish it. In case you don't have this particular head sculpt, there's others that you can use, and you can make your figure look as stylized as you want it. So it does not have to look like somebody else envisioned it. You're the creator, you are the artist, make it look how you want it to be. Let's have a look at a few of these set sculpts. So I hope they gave you some ideas as to what you can do with your figure. Now, this is the portrait that I purchased off of eBay, and I went ahead and painted it. It came as a blank. So as you saw earlier, I did paint the eyes, but much earlier I did paint the skin tone. Once you place it on the body, well, you actually have to remember these head sculpts come hollow on the inside. I ended up using epoxy, as you saw in one of my past videos, to attach the head to the peg. Now it can sit there permanently and move in any direction without falling off. That's up to you, however you want to attach it. But let's go on and look at some of the other details that are needed, like the emblem. Now it comes time to paint the emblem, and as you remember, I did cover it in liquid mask, which is a liquid silicone. Or liquid resin is what it is. Now I want to remove it. Let's see how well it protected that particular piece underneath. And as you can tell, you can pretty much just rub it off. It's not on permanently. And on those tight crevices or edges, you will have to use a different object to move it out of there. Your fingers are going to be way too big to get into those corners. Now once you clean it off, you'll be able to paint it. Oh, by the way, those of you that want to see it in the yellow emblem, let me show you what that looks like. I really wasn't too crazy about it. I don't like the black edge on it. You might like it. I don't. This is what it looks like before I painted it gold. Take a good look. It's not going to be yellow for long. Well, we have reached the end of this video, and this is just the last detail to add is this medallion on the rope. But I hope that you learned something today. I hope that you liked this video. It was rather long, so you make sure you use those chapters to go back and review the portions that you may have, well, not understood completely. And of course, if you've got any questions, let me know in those comments. And let me know how this character had an impact on you as you were growing up. In the meantime, don't forget that we still have not reached 6,000 subscribers, so that custom Wally portrait is still up for grabs. In the meantime, I'm going to leave you with some video of the finished project with the fourth cape that I did, and I really do like it that much better. So don't be discouraged if you don't get it right the first time. Try it again until you get the results that you are looking for, and it may take you more than 3 times to do it. In the meantime, don't forget to keep customizing those figures, and we'll see you here next time. So we are well on our way to 6,000 subscribers. We're almost there, and Wally West is still up for grabs. Nobody has won yet. The winner will be announced once we reach 6,000 subscribers. And of course, if you comment more than once, it will give you more probability of winning this custom sculpt. Be sure you follow the instructions that pop up on the screen. And yes, this contest is only for US residents. I will not ship outside the country. It's just too expensive. Keep in mind that we have more information coming up, more to share on these custom figures. So don't forget to subscribe, and of course, we'll see you here next time.